I've got a watch which, as those of you who know preachers, means absolutely nothing whatsoever at all. So good to be with you. What I've been asked to do is just to try and talk about something about the contribution that we see churches making to this whole area of community development. And what you're going to get really is a personal view from a practitioner. I am not an expert in churches' community development, as you will very quickly discover. There is a stream this afternoon with better experts than me if you want to engage with that at a different kind of way. But what I'm trying to do is to draw on the role that I have now. My title is Bishop of Grimsby. I'm one of the Anglican bishops in the diocese. The diocese, as you know, goes from the Humber right down to Stamford, Deeping, Gainsborough, all the way around the coast. So it's a fairly large geographical area connecting with Greater Lincolnshire. And I've got a kind of area responsibility for churches towards the north of that diocese, and a strategic responsibility for what we call mission across the whole of Greater Lincolnshire. And I'm drawing on some of that and my previous experience as a parish priest in four very different settings. I started as a curate in a suburb of Kettering in Northamptonshire. I then did something called church planting. So an area down in Bournemouth, an area of an established area, but an area which did not have a church. And so trying to build church and community in an area like that. I've worked in what is called a UPA area in Norwich, one of the more deprived areas in Norwich, and latterly I was vicar in Cromer, the gem of the North Norfolk coast, which is also a premier East Coast resort. And all of them, in all of those places, we've tried to take the role of the church in terms of community engagement and community responsibility seriously. And in some ways, I think what I'm going to do is an exercise in stating what I think is the obvious in terms of what churches are about. I hope that what I tell you actually isn't new, but stating the obvious has never stopped me before, and I don't see why it should now. And I just want to kind of put on the table what I think it is we as church offer to this area to contribute to the discussion. And although clearly I come from an Anglican tradition, I think what I'm saying is true for all of the churches that contribute to the life of the county. When I was younger, and when my children were younger, they used to sing a song which has got actions to it. Now that they are 27 and 30, it is harder to get them to do the same thing. But the song went something like, and I'm not going to sing it and I'm not going to do the actions, you will be relieved to know. But the song goes something like, the church is not a building or a place where people meet. It doesn't have to have a tower or pews or wooden seats. The church is made of people, just like you and just like me. It's another name for God's family. And I think it's worth just stating the obvious at the beginning. What we're talking about isn't particularly the building, although buildings at times are useful. We're not talking about the organisation, the kind of bishops and archdeacons and vicars and people who have the rings of confidence around their necks and all of those groups of people. We're talking about the church as people. People who might gather on a Sunday or different time of the week, but are then sent out to actually make a difference in the world, in the communities they are there to serve. So the church is a gathered group of people who have recognised something special in the person of Jesus and are trying to live their lives in response to that, but are not purely focused on what goes on a Sunday. sent out to be church in the other 157 hours of the week, if I've got my maths right. A man called David Bosch says this. I've got a few quotes just to try and justify my existence and to give you a bit of theology in terms of what we're doing. But a man called David Bosch says this: mission is thereby seen as a movement from God to the world. The church is viewed as an instrument for that mission. There is a church because there is mission, not vice versa. To participate in mission is to participate in the movements of God's love towards people, since God is a fountain of sending love. The job of the church is to be out in the world making a difference. It leads to that oft quoted things which lots of us will know, that it's not the church of God that has a mission in the world, but it's the God of mission who has a church to live that out. A more recent report from the Church of England called Setting God's People Free says this: our goal is not one of reorganisation. Rather, it's about redemption. And the bit I love is this: it's not just a redemption from something, it's a redemption for something. People who are called to then go on and serve their communities and make a difference. Not just a redemption from, but a redemption for. And if you want something from a different tradition, this comes from Pope Benedict. The gospel, he says, is not merely a communication of things that can be known. It's one that makes things happen and is life-changing. The dark door of time of the future has been thrown open. The one who has hope lives differently. The one who hopes has been granted the gift of new life and tries to live that out in the real world where it counts. Here's the confession. We've not always been very good at it. Here is the confession. Sometimes we're still not very good at it. Some of you will know the screw tape letters from C.S. Lewis, Letters to a Junior Devil. In this little book, it's quoted. What is a Christian? What function do they have? If you were to ask Wormwood, the junior demon from C.S. Lewis's screw tape letters, he might give you a very jaundiced view. Their function, he says, is to live happy and contented lives, keeping themselves to themselves and having nothing whatsoever to do with the poorer members of the community. Good Hades! You don't want to go mixing with the riffraff. If you're not careful, some of them might start coming to your church and lowering the tone of the place. No, you don't want to let that happen. And some churches have taken that advice very, very seriously. There are far too many of our churches, if we're honest, which are inward looking and which have become groups for those who like that sort of thing, rather than own that bigger picture that those quotes were alluding to. There have been times in our history when we've made that silly divide between what we call the social gospel and a kind of gospel of personal salvation, of wanting to change individual lives. And we seem to have forgotten at times that God is concerned with all of life. We make this kind of thing where we have a sacred and a secular, as if there are some things that God is interested in and other things that are not part of his agenda. And at times in our church history, we've lived that kind of way. And sometimes people like us to live that kind of way. Sometimes when the church tries to speak and get involved in what is seen as the secular, there are groups of people who want to put us back into our sacred box, and we allow them to do that. But the picture is one where all of life is given by God, and the church is called to be involved in all of it. Sometimes, as that last quote there says from a lady called Anne Morrissey, we as church get too involved in our own protection and preservation that we forget the bigger picture of the transformation we're called to bring about to the world. And yet that is what we're there for. This is a poem from a lady who basically was in need, received a response from the church which was inadequate, and so wrote this. I was hungry, she says, and she formed a humanities group to discuss my hunger. I was imprisoned, and you crept off quietly to your chapel and prayed for my release. I was naked, and in your mind you debated the morality of my appearance. I was sick, and you knelt and thanked God for your health. I was homeless, and you preached to me of the spiritual shelter of the love of God. I was lonely, and you left me alone to pray for me. You seem so holy, so close to God, but I am still very hungry and lonely and cold. And there's no excuse for those of us who claim to be Christians for that kind of response. If we look at our foundation documents, we see that we have a creation made good. God looks at the world and says that it was good. He says that it was very good. You look at our foundation documents, you see people made for each other. That verse says, it's the first not good in the Bible. And the verse said, it is not good for man to live alone. You can take that verse and play lots of games with it, but it certainly says that we're there for community. We're designed for each other. You go to the end of the book. You've got all peoples, all nations, all tribes, all languages living together in community. And in a sense, the rest of the book, all of the pages in between, are how we achieve that. How we achieve kind of community with God and community with each other. It's how we can make a fair stab at that, despite sometimes the way we are and the way we fail. You go back to the Old Testament, you've got the call of Abraham, central to all three great faiths of Christianity, Judaism and Islam. Abraham is called to be blessed to bless others. That's the point. Blessing to bless others. You've got it there in the prophets. If I had more time, I would read that passage out because it's one of my favourite passages in the whole of the Bible. Of God rebuking his people at the time for not engaging with the poor, for not engaging with the oppressed, for not engaging and making a difference to the vulnerable, the alien in their midst. You've got it there as the people of God at the time are sent into exile. That's a wonderful verse. How the people are told to pray to pray and work for the welfare of their city, a city in Babylon. To pray and work for the welfare of those they live amongst. And I guess for Christians, preeminently, you've got everything there in the example of Jesus himself. His actions, his teachings, his modelling. A man who constantly challenged exclusion and modelled inclusion. Challenged exclusion and promoted inclusion. This apparently is the Queen's favourite teaching of Jesus, but probably not quite in this form. One day, a morally righteous lawyer, admittedly an oxymoron, put Jesus' wisdom on trial. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to be eternally gifted with life?" Jesus said to him, "You're legally abled. What does the law say?" The lawyer answered humbly, "You shall love your higher power with body, mind and soul, and your neighbour as yourself." The lawyer was secretly pleased to display his knowledge of the law. Then Jesus said, "You answered correctly. Do this and you will never be terminally inconvenienced." But the lawyer, showing that he was not multiculturally sensitive, asked, "And who is my neighbour?" So Jesus told this story. A male Jewish person was travelling from Jerusalem to Jericho on a road where he was likely to meet some morally different people. In fact, he was soon physically abused by some potential clients of the penal system who invaded his personal space and relieved him of his money. Truly insensitive to his needs, they left him for dead, lying beside the road. However, they should not be held responsible for their actions, since they were economically and emotionally disadvantaged, having come from dysfunctional families. A religiously inclined Jewish person happened to be travelling down the same road and saw the left for dead male Jewish person. Unfortunately, he was feeling impoverished and walked to the other side of the road to avoid the medically needy person. A short time later, another religiously advanced Jewish person walked down the road. He saw the medically needy Jewish person and, being emotionally impaired, walked by on the other side of the road. Finally, a generosity-gifted Samaritan walked down the same road. Even though Samaritans were marginalised in that society and considered belief impoverished by Jews, he stopped by the male Jewish person who by this time was seriously life impaired. When he saw the soon-to-expire person, he became compassion-abled. He dressed the Jewish male's wounds and put him on his non-human animal. He felt somewhat guilty about exploiting the donkey with the extra burden, but used an outcomes-based evaluation to ease his mind. The generosity-gifted Samaritan took the medically needy Jewish person to an inn and said to the inn person, "This person needs medical attention. I didn't have time to take him to my health maintenance organisation. Please meet his needs and I'll make a transfer payment from my bank account to pay the bill." Then Jesus asked the multiculturally impaired lawyer, "Which of these three persons was the most sensitive to the male Jewish person's needs?" The lawyer unwittingly revealed his own moral dysfunction by commenting, "I wish I could have found that injured person myself and sued those morally different persons." Jesus said, "You're not getting the point. Let me rephrase the question. Which of these three was a neighbour to the male Jewish person?" The lawyer reluctantly answered, "The one who was generosity gifted." Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." The lawyer immediately ran to the Jerusalem to Jericho road and began to look for victimised persons, potential clients, so he could enhance his income. The lawyer, preaching mode, the lawyer wanted to limit who he had to love. He wanted to limit who his neighbour was. Jesus says there is to be no limit to those we consider to be neighbours. It's central to what we're intended to be about as church. I love this from a man called Mark Green talking about the growth of the early church. He says, historically, the reason, humanly speaking, that Christianity grew was not just because it was true, but because it was good news for people's lives and therefore attractive to believers and not yet believers. In a Roman Empire that practiced infanticide of girls and oppressed women through enforced and highly dangerous abortions, the Christian stance against infanticide and abortion was actually good news for women. Similarly, when the Roman Empire was hit by terrible epidemics in AD 165 and 251, overall the pagan population neither looked after those who shared their beliefs nor those who didn't. However, the combination of Christian teaching about heaven and loving your neighbour meant that Christians nursed both sick Christians and sick pagans. Independent of any miraculous intervention, the survival rate was higher among Christians and their pagan friends than amongst those who were not connected to Christians. To cities filled with the homeless and impoverished, Christianity offers charity as well as hope. To cities filled with newcomers and strangers, Christianity offered an immediate basis for attachments. To cities filled with orphans and widows, Christianity provided a new and extended sense of family. To cities torn by ethnic strife, Christianity offered a new basis for social solidarity. And to cities faced with epidemics, fires and earthquakes, Christianity offered effective nursing services. This is what we say we're supposed to be about as church today. These are the 5 marks of mission that some of us will know. We're called to actually tell people... Sorry, I've gone too far down that, haven't I? No, that's right. We're called to actually tell people what it is we believe. We're called to actually encourage people to join with us. Those are the kind of evangelistic bits. But then we're also called to do this, to respond to human need by serving the communities we're set in. We're called to try and speak up when speaking up is the appropriate thing to do. We're called to try and preserve this wonderful planet that we live in. What does that look like in practice? Well, I did this for something slightly different. This is the church I led in Cromer. When I was having my hair cut and I didn't want to admit to what I was to what I did for a living, I used to say that my job was about building authentic, honest Christian community. I still hold with that as the job of the leader of a church, to be somebody who helps to build authentic, honest Christian community. These are the things that we did in the town of Cromer. Stay and Play was recognising that when mums dropped off their children at the local school, they were often hanging around with nothing to do. So we opened up our building, served coffee, and people stayed and played with their smaller children. Take a Break was the traditional kind of parent and toddlers group that churches often engage with. We had one on a Tuesday, one on a Thursday. We reached 100 families in Cromer doing that kind of thing. Girls' Night Out is precisely what it said. It was a once a month gathering for ladies, providing people ladies of different ages to actually meet and engage together. Passion for Life was a bit more evangelistic. Cornerstone was our cafe in the town, offering cheap coffee and cheap meals 4 days a week. Meeting Point, hugely proud of. Tuesday evening, a gathering point for about 30-40 people with special needs, and serving that part of our community. Benjamin Court was a wonderful example of integrated social care and hospital care, and it was going in to serve the people there. Residential homes going in to meet the needs of people there. Bowls was a way of getting people together who'd moved into the area, who wanted to meet. We had a big hall, we had people who enjoyed bowls. We used that and we gathered new people together. Holiday at home was for that increasingly ageing population who didn't want to go away but wanted to do something together. So for 3 days in the summer, we basically did a holiday club for the over 70. Well, they used to advertise it for the over 60s, and as I got closer to that, I got a bit anxious. And effectively, it was kind of the over 75s and 80s. But providing something to bring those people together. The art group was because we had people who were really, they loved art and wanted to share their love of art with others. So we had an art group. Plus one. Technician somewhere. Have I done something? Oh, it's very good. Plus one was our engagement with the youth of Cromer. We were the only people doing youth work in Cromer. We had people who were really engaged in surfing, so we offered free surfing lessons to the young people of Cromer. Momentum was for those who wanted to take, young people who wanted to take spirituality more seriously. Fresh Air was the work we did in schools, both kind of spiritual work and providing, we did sports clubs. When the teachers went home, we did the sports clubs in the school. Open the Book was going into schools. Activity days and all-age parties was providing alternatives, things like providing alternatives for Halloween for those who wanted it. We did assemblies, we did Alpha. Holiday ministry was inviting. My congregations used to go up by 200 in the summer because it's a holiday area. So how do you deal and how do you serve the people who come to that area in a sensible way? Beach mission is what it says. Carnival, we were hugely involved. Carnival was massive in Cromer. We always put a float on. If you want to embarrass the Bishop of Grimsby, Google images of Bishop of Grimsby and you will see various costumes that I wore, which I now bitterly regret. But it felt like a good idea at the time. Christmas lights was our engagement with the whole of the Cromer community. They used to have a market out in the streets outside the church. If you've ever tried having a market, an outdoor market in Cromer, the first weekend in December, you will know how bitterly cold that is. So we opened up the building to make sure that it was used properly. And that doesn't, none of that counts. All of the stuff, that was the organised stuff, let alone the individual kind of things that people contributed to their community. And in addition to that, we were the largest voluntary organisation in the town. When people moved to the town, where did they start off by looking to find community? Usually they came to us. We were the most disparate, all-age group of people trying to live and work together in the town of Cromer. And that some of that community believed what we stood for. And we wanted that. I'm not going to hide from that. Some people just came to us on a Sunday because it was a good place to be. We also provided opportunities when things went wrong. When we had a murder and a suicide, it was the church who provided the response for that. And that's replicated across so many churches. If I had more time, and David has indicated I haven't, we'd have looked at the Cinnamon Trust, which looks at the things that goes on in the city of Lincoln. Very quickly, 353 projects, that number of beneficiaries, that number of volunteers, making that amount of financial value to the city of Lincoln. You ask yourself, Was it better that the church was in Cromer, engaged than not? I think the answer is yes. You ask yourself the question, is it good that the faith communities are involved in the city of Lincoln? The answer is clearly yes. I haven't got time for that quote, so we'll leave that for now. I think the challenge is how we work in partnership together. I chair something called the Bishop of Lincoln's Social Justice Fund, which I do with Sue from the Lincolnshire Community Foundation. We started with £1 million to try and make a difference to communities across Greater Lincolnshire. And we want applications from churches from that. We want applications from churches who are willing to work with other partners. Churches who recognise this job needs doing, but we can't do it by ourselves. So who can we find to partner with us? And we give grants to those organisations. We give grants to organisations who know what they want to do, but want to work in partnership with churches because they recognise there's something that churches can do that maybe they can't. And we give grants to them. And we give grants simply to people who want to do good stuff, because it's important that good stuff happens. When I was in Bournemouth, my job in Bournemouth, I got money from the city council there because they, for youth work, for an art club and for something else I've temporarily forgotten, because they recognised that if they gave the money to the church, we'd kind of got a track record. We'd kind of got a durability and a reliability, which meant we tended to deliver what it was we were asked to deliver. And I know that there are challenges. I know that sometimes there are concerns from partners. We live in a multicultural, pluralistic society, and I know there are concerns about working with individual faith groups. I know that there are concerns sometimes from faith groups about working with partners and whether it will restrict what they can do. But the challenge for me is, will the church step up? For those of us who come from that part of today, will the church step up and be that incarnational servant church that we're called to be, making a real offer of life for the people we're there to serve? Or will we withdraw to be that holy, comfortable huddle? And for those of us who are not part of the church, I think the challenge is, are we willing to work in partnership with us so that we can build the kind of communities we all want to see? Which was longer than the 2 minutes he indicated to me.